Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I am Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Voice coming back a little bit, but yeah, looking forward to another good slate of games, and it's been an incredible start to the season for us so far.
Definitely has been already Wednesday, another game coming up tomorrow. Exciting stuff all around the NFL. Let's start off with the Mike Evans suspension. Mike Evans suspended for Sunday's game against the Green Bay Packers. And I mean, you'd have a hard time believing this before the season started, but the Buccaneers are running very, very low on wide receivers. Before the season, I was wondering how Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Russell Gage and Julio Jones and all of these guys would find the field. And now a lot of those guys are hurt. Mike Evans is suspended, and the Buccaneers had to sign Cole Beasley to their practice squad. Certainly not a bad option to have to add to their roster here before week 3, but it's kind of amazing how all of this came together so quickly and how those offensive playmakers got depleted so fast.
It really is, and it extends the offensive line a bit as well. But like you discussed, there was an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver, and now we're at a point where they are signing guys off the street. And yeah, Cole Beasley is a huge addition. A really good slot wide receiver, has been productive in Buffalo the last couple of years. A guy that I'm sure will get on the same page with Tom Brady in short order. Maybe not in time for this game against the Green Bay Packers, but. You mentioned too, Russell Gage, who was recruited by Brady, 3-year, $30 million deal, kind of struggling to even get on the field, has a little bit of hamstring issue himself. So maybe if he needs to get a little bit healthier before he plays, but you never thought that there would be an issue of wide receiver ability or availability, I guess, in Tampa. And it's week 3 and we're pretty much already in full on panic mode.
Yeah. The Buccaneers had better wide receiver depth than probably 95% of other teams. I'm not sure even who else would have, but at the same time, you did kind of know that Julio Jones might not stay healthy all season. Obviously, you knew that Chris Godwin was coming off the torn ACL. You knew that Mike Evans might wind up fighting the New Orleans Saints because that seems to happen every time they play, and then he might get a suspension. Even though C.J. Gardner-Johnson no longer on the Saints, but the Saints can still do a good job of pissing off the Buccaneers wide receivers. So good for Marshawn Lattimore there, I guess, because I'd say that this pretty significantly hurts the Buccaneers' chances against the Green Bay Packers in what's a pretty massive Week 3 matchup, because Tom Brady has already struggled. Maybe not struggled, but he hasn't been himself early in the season because of the wide receiver issues, but also because of some of the offensive line issues that they're going through.
The combination is really the problem, right? When you're down to maybe a third string left tackle with Donovan Smith out, and then Josh Wells, his backup, also gets hurt in the game he plays. Obviously, issues along the interior with no Ryan Jensen at center, Aaron Stinney at guard, who was competing to start there. It does, because the Packers have a very, very good secondary, but also with guys like Rashawn Gary and Kenny Clark, both off to very fast starts this year. Brady does, of course, get the ball out really quickly, known for keeping it, 2.5 seconds and out. That's kind of his thing. But when guys aren't getting open early in the progression, you can't do that. And when you're relying on guys like Brashad Perriman and some of these deep threat and deep field options, guys that aren't, the shifty Cole Beasley types, maybe that's why he was brought in. It's hard to do those things. And Vegas agrees, because it went from the Packers open, the Packers open +3. We're catching a field goal. They're now +1. So even though it's only 2 points, it is a big 2 points to move off of that field goal spread and come down to close to a pick 'em. And that's because these Buccaneers are dealing with a lot of important losses. Akeem Hicks on the defensive side of the ball as well.
Yeah, definitely. They had to work out some offensive tackles yesterday. They didn't wind up signing any of them. They did wind up signing Justin School, former 49ers draft pick. So, yeah, the depth issues across the NFL at offensive tackle is something that I've basically never seen before. I think like these guys are being signed off the street, probably going to have to play. Guys who like teams viewed as guards entering the season now are having to play tackle, and yeah, it's a pretty major issue. And I've probably said this a million times, but Tom Brady is pretty dependent on his weapons. Tom Brady was not the same quarterback in 2006. He was not the same quarterback in 2013. He was not the same quarterback in 2019 when his weapons were not as good. And I think that that's what we're seeing earlier this season. So I still think that he can bounce back. I still think that he's Tom Brady. I don't think we're finally starting to see that cliff that Sam Monson referenced 8 years ago, or that maybe he wasn't the one who used the word cliff, but no, I don't think we're seeing the regression from Tom Brady at 45. I think this has much more to do with the pieces around him. Let's get into some rumors around the NFL. I put together a notebook today. I do that on every Wednesday at pff.com. And basically the lead headline on this was quarterback prospects who have been considered risers early in the college football season. And I know it's still very early, but everyone wants to know about this quarterback class. I reached out to one person who said that he predicts 3 or 4 quarterbacks to go in the first round. I thought that Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud are battling it out for that top spot in the draft. You got Will Levis out of Kentucky, and then that Anthony Richardson out of Florida, despite the fact that he's really struggled the last 2 games, is still the X factor. He still has a possibility to be drafted in the first round and could even be taken third among those quarterbacks. So just initially, what's your takeaway on that?
Yeah, I think if you watch Anthony Richardson, I watched the Utah game and I watched the Kentucky game where he did have a mistake in that Kentucky game. He threw a pick 6, and it kind of riled him for the rest of the game. But he's the guy where the physical tools are off the charts. He might actually be more talented than all the guys we mentioned, which is saying a lot because C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young are obviously, freak athletes in their own right. I think Young, the game processes for him at a level that you don't really see very often for college quarterbacks. And that's kind of the separator there. With Richardson, he makes some throws and has just the ability to do some things that, off-platform stuff and things like that you buy traits, right? We always talk about this during draft time. You bet on traits and you go from there. One more name I'll throw in, not saying it's necessarily a first-round pick, but you mentioned him in your article, and he's a guy that I thought was a riser, and that is KJ Jefferson with Arkansas. Mm-hmm. This team in general, I didn't really know what to expect from them. Was last year an aberration? Were they going to carry this forward and get back to being kind of that top 20 football team we're used to seeing? And I watched them against South Carolina that, yes, under new head coach, what's his name? I know it's Frank Beamer's kid, but now I'm blanking on his first name.
I can't help you there.
Shane Beamer. They have some talent. They are kind of a new program, but nevertheless, he looked really good in that game. And even if you watched Traylon Burks' tape last year, you thought sometimes that he left some yards after the catch on the field because it wasn't a great throw from KJ Jefferson. I'm not seeing that anymore. I think he's taken a big step this offseason. So, yeah, it is a strong quarterback class for sure.
Yeah, I had one scout tell me that KJ Jefferson has made himself some money early this season. And the other one that I heard from a number of people was Stetson Bennett, the Georgia quarterback, who's 5'11", 190. He's going to be 25 years old in October. So after a few people told me that Stetson Bennett is a riser, has a chance to be drafted, I actually reached out to Mike Renner and Anthony Tresh, our own college football analyst, to be like, is this insane? Like, is this real? Could he actually be drafted? And I don't want to give away too much of what they said, but Renner said that, yeah, based on what he's done this season, he looks draftable. And Anthony Tresh also said that, it's certainly a possibility that he could wind up being a day 3 pick. So you've got to be pretty good to be 5'11", 190 pounds, 25 years old, former walk-on, 6th-year senior, to be talked about being drafted. But Scout told me there's always going to be a fan club for winners who make good decisions. A few other ones to throw out there: NC State quarterback Devin Leary, Houston quarterback Clayton Tune, BYU's Jaron Hall, and Purdue's Aiden O'Connell. BYU's Jaron Hall is kind of interesting because tell me if this sounds familiar. He's an older quarterback prospect who goes to BYU who's dealt with a lot of injuries. You think that maybe if Sean Payton lands somewhere next year, he might be interested in Jaron Hall?
Hall's a good player. I remember watching Hall a little bit last year as well. He's interesting. He is a little bit shorter, but he's kind of bulky and can take some contact. Yeah, Sean Payton in the news today for saying he would come around for the right opportunity. I think we've obviously discussed at length that the Dallas Cowboys could be a right opportunity. Maybe the Miami Dolphins. Obviously, Mike McDaniel off to a great start there in Miami. But, yeah, there's a connection right there for you.
It's super early, obviously, but since we are talking about quarterbacks, I just wanted to kind of go through a list of some teams that actually could wind up looking for quarterbacks in the draft this year, just because a lot of teams skipped out on quarterbacks in the 2022 draft class because there weren't good options out there. So I think the Lions would be near the top of that list. Giants could be looking for a quarterback. Let's see who else is in here. Seahawks obviously could be looking for a quarterback. Some of the teams that did draft quarterbacks last year, I mean, if the Falcons wind up picking first or second overall, I don't necessarily think that, taking Desmond Ridder would take them out of the quarterback conversation. Carolina Panthers, New Orleans Saints. I don't know. It feels like there's like a solid third of the league that might be heading into the draft looking at or needing a quarterback.
Yeah, no, I would certainly agree with you. I don't think
Texans.
Yeah, the Texans for sure. If Davis Mills doesn't take some strides, and they're not really stuck with him, obviously as a third round draft pick, there isn't that investment or that sunk cost kind of feeling to it. I do, and I think we are in an era now, and I frankly think every week that Jalen Hurts plays as well as he's playing, I think more and more teams are going to recognize adding quarterback talent, unless you have a guy, unless you have a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes type of player, you probably should be looking at quarterbacks every single year. Not saying you should take one or use your first round pick on one, but sticking with an average dude, it doesn't work in today's NFL. And I think we're going to see more and more teams embody that. You mentioned a couple teams, but look, if the Jets don't see growth from Zach Wilson, if the Chicago Bears don't see growth from Justin Fields, again, I'm not suggesting it, but I think those teams will have more conversations about the possibility than perhaps in the past.
Definitely. Colts would be another team to throw out there. And yeah, I mean, almost all of the NFCs. I mean, the Buccaneers could use a quarterback next year as well. I don't think they'll be in a great position to draft one, but that's why you're hearing about potentially 4 quarterbacks taken. I'm curious to see, if any of the quarterbacks from last year's draft class, obviously Kenny Pickett has the best chance of becoming something there with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let's just talk about the Tennessee Titans real quick. Taylor Lewan, it's been reported that he's possibly out for the season with a knee injury. Titans have already started the season 0-2. Ryan Tannehill hasn't looked great so far. He was not benched, but he was taken out of the game for Malik Willis. Malik Willis didn't do a whole lot on Monday night. But I don't know. I mean, I still think the Titans have a chance this season just because the AFC South is wide open, but they're certainly a team that looked like Mike Vrabel was ready to kill them in that game.
I would not want to be in that locker room after that game. That is no question. Or at practice this week. Yeah, I mean, I think the Lewan injury is a huge deal too. He has dealt with injuries in the last couple of years. But his replacement, I want to say, gave up 7 pressures after Lewan left the game. It was early in the first quarter, so basically a full game. But yeah, Dennis Daly did not have a great showing in relief. They lost left guard Roger Saffold, who's now on the Buffalo Bills already this offseason. Derrick Henry does not really look particularly great so far this season. And a lot of that probably has to do with blocking. So, yeah, 0-2 start. Yes, they have the AFC South, safety net, so to speak. But, the Jaguars are not quite the Jaguars of old anymore. The Colts and Texans don't look particularly incredible. But nevertheless, there is concern there because it is when you have Malik Willis in the building, it becomes a question at a certain point of, are we better off getting this guy reps and developing him at the cost of maybe winning football games? When does that conversation happen? Obviously, we're not saying it's happening right now, but if they're, a couple games below 500 in week 10 in an AFC where I think you need to win like 11 games to get a wild card in this AFC, it would probably be smart and behoove them to just get Malik Willis in there and see what you have in him. With Tannehill's contract, no guarantees beyond this season.
Yeah, and it's not a perfect comparison, but I mean, he's probably the closest thing in last year's draft to what Jalen Hurts has become. There's a possibility that you could find that type of quarterback in the third round and that the Titans might have. Let's go back to my rumor roundup piece real quick. I wanted to touch on 2 more things. First of which was Gabe Davis's status. He got hurt on Saturday, as we mentioned on Monday's show. I was told that he was kind of going up for a pass during practice, landed awkwardly on his foot/ankle. It's a low ankle sprain, which is definitely positive, not a high ankle sprain. He did a workout before the game. He was sprinting around 20 miles per hour, but the Bills still did not let him play in the game. Wise decision. The Bills absolutely smoked the Tennessee Titans. And, I mean, everything that I'm hearing right now is that Gabe Davis should be able to play this weekend. He wants to play this weekend. I was told that he's going to fight the entire team if he's not allowed to play this weekend, but it's still ultimately up to the Bills. So I don't want to go so far as to say that he's going to play or anything like that because it's much more important to have Gabe Davis on the field in January than it is in September, even though they are playing a Miami Dolphins team that looked very good in week 2.
Yeah, that is the big key here is, two 2-0 AFC East teams going up against each other. Although I guess notably, Byron Jones is obviously still on IR through the first 4 weeks. And it sounds like Xavier Howard did not practice today. Their star outside cornerback, no indication he's not going to play, but not at 100% himself. Like you said, if you're going to win 41-7, you probably don't need Gabriel Davis. But in some of these bigger matchups against a really good defense in Miami, even with those injuries, with a good defensive front that can get, in Josh Allen's lap in a hurry, you want him there. You really do. And so that is interesting to hear, that it's still lingering into this week and there's a possibility he does not play because they really don't have that much depth. Isaiah McKenzie is a solid slot receiver, but you go down the rest of the list. I mean, we mentioned Cole Beasley now with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Emmanuel Sanders just retired. Looks like he's going to NFL Network. Those were their guys last year, and they haven't really replaced them.
Yeah, you saw Jake Kumro taking a lot of snaps, and like I said, he's probably going to play. He was limited in practice though today, so that's certainly something to monitor. One other thing was that I just wanted to check in on Kevin King because he's a 27-year-old cornerback, graded out at a 71 overall last season for us. I know that he's been kind of up and down throughout his career with the Green Bay Packers, but it's still been interesting to see him just kind of sitting out there in free agency. Excuse me. And I was told that he just wants to take this season to get healthy, that, he got some offers in free agency. Teams were checking in on him, and he dealt with a ton of injuries last season. Last season alone, he had a concussion. He was placed on the COVID list, and he had hip, knee, and shoulder injuries. He's been a guy who's dealt with injuries almost every year. So he's pretty adamant that he wants to take this year, get fully healthy, come back in 2023. It's a bit of a risk to take an entire year off and then say to teams like, hey, remember me? Okay, sign me now. And obviously there's always the possibility that some perfect situation would come along or that he feels fully healthy or whatever it is. So I just want to kind of couch it with that. But it does sound like he's probably not going to play, and then that's why he has not signed yet at this point.
No, it is super interesting because, like you said, he has had an up and down career. There have been times where his grades have been nowhere near 70, like you mentioned last season. And obviously, in particular, everyone kind of thinks of Scotty Miller burning him at the end of the first half in that NFC Championship game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But the interesting thing there is, and that was a poor season for him in general, the Packers then brought him back on a 1 year, I want to say $4 or $5 million flyer, which is not nothing. It's a decent 1 year deal for a former second round pick that the original team still thought they could get something out of. Taking a year off carries a risk for sure. He is that, obviously he's a Husky, all that. And he's a, 6'1", 6'2", big body outside corner. I think there's always kind of a market for those guys. As long as they're willing to play, someone will probably pay him to do so.
Yeah, because I even saw some of the mentions on Twitter today saying like, oh, sure, that's what the plan was. Like, guys, there's a lot of cornerbacks out there who are signed on 53-man rosters and practice squads that are considerably worse than Kevin King. It's tough to find 6'1" cornerbacks who can run a 4.43, and that's what Kevin King provides. And last year, he did still play pretty significant snaps for the Green Bay Packers. So just something to look out for next season. One of those things where I was just kind of interested about it, decided to reach out, and what I found was pretty interesting. Let's talk about a trade that happened today. Not exactly the sexiest trade, but you saw the New England Patriots trade offensive tackle Justin Herron to the Las Vegas Raiders for a 2024 late round pick swap. Justin Herron is interesting because he was a guy who he played at Wake Forest. I think he played like 6 years there. He got like an extra year somehow, but basically throughout his entire tenure with the Patriots, he's played well at left tackle and he hasn't really played particularly well anywhere else. So maybe he's just one of those guys where it's like they say that, kicking back from right tackle feels like you're trying to play left-handed, whatever it is. But the Raiders definitely needed offensive line depth. Josh McDaniels obviously knows Justin Herron from his time in New England. Dave Ziegler knows there's a lot of familiarity there from Carmen Porcillo, the offensive line coach. So it seems like it could be a decent fit for the Raiders. And the Patriots, I don't know. They didn't get a whole lot, but they just signed Marcus Cannon to their practice squad, so maybe they just feel more comfortable with him as offensive line depth.
Yeah, it is very interesting that you mentioned the split of left tackle versus right tackle because basically the only good offensive lineman for the Raiders right now is left tackle Colton Miller. I think all four other positions with Andre James, the center, who's now injured, are just question marks at this point. I mean, I also just think it's interesting because the Patriots, they moved on from Shaq Mason. They let Ted Karras walk in free agency. Now trading Justin Herron to the Raiders. Obviously, Isaiah Wynn, they have injury concerns with him. It's why they didn't really even entertain extension conversations playing on his 5th-year option. They're just for a team that values and loves offensive linemen, they've just been really willing to let these guys go recently. But it's big for the Raiders. They need to do something. Maybe try to get him to revitalize his career at right tackle or a solid swing option. But Derek Carr has struggled. It's certainly a lot of it has been his fault, but you watch the second half of that Cardinals game as well. When it started to become kind of a one-score game again and the Raiders realized, we have to get back to throwing the football and not just kind of wasting time, they couldn't really do it. And the Cardinals do not have a great pass rush, especially on the edge.
Definitely, yeah. It's I think getting as many bodies in there as possible for the Raiders is definitely important. So now the Patriots, as I mentioned, Marcus Cannon. We also got Yannick Just on their roster. It wasn't ideal tackle depth for them to start the season anyway. They do have pretty decent starters, like you mentioned, Isaiah Wynn and Trent Brown. But I did just pull those numbers real quick while we were talking. And Justin Herron at left tackle, 472 career snaps, 74.8 PFF grade, which, I mean, that's one of the most difficult positions in sports. Yeah. That's a solid grade. At right tackle, 301 snaps, 45.9 PFF grade. I feel like a pass blocking 68.3 at left tackle, 39.3 at right tackle. So there's something there. I don't know. I mean, he did play left tackle in college. I'll also just say about Justin Herron, this doesn't matter or anything. One of the nicest guys that you could possibly ever talk to. And he had a story this offseason or last offseason where there was he basically saved a woman from a violent. Yeah, it was. So it was kind of a heroic situation there for Justin Herron. So Justin Herron, good guy. Hopefully things work out for him there in Las Vegas. Let's talk about the Cowboys real quick. Everyone always likes to hear about the Cowboys. They wound up cutting Dennis Houston, which came as a pretty big surprise to anyone who does follow the Cowboys. He had a really good summer. He was playing over Jalen Tolbert in the Cowboys offense. Some people think that this might be a signal that Michael Gallup is returning at wide receiver for the Cowboys sooner than later.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly seem to be that indication. It sounds like this week he is going to practice, and Mike McCarthy said he is going to get a full practice, and we'll see how his body responds. But if it responds positively, then he'll start playing. I know Jerry Jones referred to Noah Brown as Wilson in a radio appearance this week about 5 different times, referring to Cedric Wilson, I imagine, is where his brain was going. But I think that kind of speaks volumes to who is currently catching passes for the Dallas Cowboys. When the owner can't even kind of keep the name straight. So Michael Gallup's return will be massive. CeeDee Lamb has kind of been a bit underwhelming, I think it's fair to say, through the first 2 weeks, but also perhaps there is the value add of Gallup is a really good downfield receiver, not just a burner, but he's a really good separator. His body control in the air is as good as it gets in the NFL, and he's a threat. And I think it just opens things up for guys around him as well, whereas Lamb kind of gets his work underneath, lines up in the slot a little bit more. So I think not only is getting Gallup back a big addition, it's a bit of a force multiplier to where it'll help a lot of people out. And so that's great news for the Dallas Cowboys.
Definitely, yeah. If he can get back on the field, that would definitely be it's the Noah Brown Wilson thing is funny because they were kind of, I feel like those guys were both on the roster for a very long time. Like Cedric Wilson was kind of that 4th, 5th hybrid wide receiver, and Noah Brown has always been kind of hanging around as well. So maybe me even last year wouldn't have fully known the difference between Cedric Wilson and Noah Brown. But when you're the owner of the team, one of those guys is currently playing on the Miami Dolphins, and the other one is a starter in your offense. You kind of hope that you know the difference there on the names, but. What you gonna do? I mean, Jerry Jones is a lot more successful than I am, so who am I to say anything about that? Any update with Dak Prescott?
Yeah, so they were saying he could be back as early as week 4. You do have to kind of wonder if they're maybe just being optimistic and trying to look at things the most positively, but it was a thumb injury to where I would imagine as long as there's not a risk of re-injury, it's more about pain management than it is anything else. And I think you can have a lot of question marks about Dak. I think he's proven he's a tough player. Has played through some ailments in the past and has kind of pushed through when he needed to. So if he's back by then, look, they got that kind of surprise upset win over the Bengals. We're catching a full touchdown on the spread and still managed to win that game. So if he's back by even week 5, week 6, and they're around 500, I know we've kind of written them off as dead, and Philadelphia does look good, but they could get right back in the mix in a very short order.
Definitely. It was pretty impressive to see them, win over the Bengals, despite the fact that Cooper Rush was starting. One of the funniest clips I saw on Twitter this week was, I think it was a clip from FS1, that show Speak, that Emmanuel Acho and LaShawn McCoy are on. LaShawn McCoy was saying like, maybe the Cowboys play harder with Cooper Rush. Like maybe they don't like Dak Prescott, all those things. And my buddy Dave Hellman, who used to write for Cowboys.com and now writes for Fox Sports, I think the first words out of his mouth was, "That's ridiculous." Which, yes, that is ridiculous. The Cowboys are in much better shape with Dak Prescott than they are with Cooper Rush. I don't think there's any thing to the idea that the Cowboys. Yeah, it's sort of one of the hottest takes I've heard recently. So big ups to Sean McCoy for that one. Let's talk about some practice participation real quick. Lamar Jackson showed up with a sleeve on his throwing elbow. The Ravens play the New England Patriots at 1:00 on Sunday. I believe I'll actually be covering that game. I wanted to write about Lamar Jackson, so I think I'll be at that one. But after the game or after practice, John Harbaugh said that Lamar Jackson will play. Lamar Jackson said after practice that he intends to throw a lot on Sunday. So not much to see there, but maybe not the greatest thing for Lamar Jackson to already be dealing with elbow soreness or whatever it is this early in the season.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, he's been unleashing the pigskin, so maybe he's just throwing his way into a sore elbow. But never want to see that. I also do think, kind of a tangent, but he's clearly bigger. Like I was watching the video before this, like he's put on some mass, and so maybe it has something to do with that. All the lifting he's been doing this offseason, maybe that's part of it as well. But hopefully he's fine. It sounds like he should be fine there. I think a couple of the notable ones, kind of going around the NFL a little bit. In Indianapolis, looks like rookie wide receiver Alec Pierce is back practicing, had a concussion last week and missed week 2. But Michael Pittman still out. And that's been a weird one where it happened late in the week, kind of came out of nowhere.
Limited, actually. I think he was limited. I think he was limited in practice.
Limited. Okay, well, that's good. So he's working. But they need those guys. I mean, there was for whatever reason, we don't know, but T.Y. Hilton's agent tweeted out T.Y. I took it as maybe, the Colts realized they're desperate and need to bring T.Y. Hilton back. Like I said, no one told us that was the case, but definitely good news to see those receivers getting healthy and getting back in practice. And then also Alvin Kamara with the New Orleans Saints practice today. You noticed his absence in that Buccaneers game. Yes, it's a great defense, a good run defense in particular. But even when Akeem Hicks went out for the Buccaneers, the Saints really couldn't get anything going on the ground. And I think that's just because, with all due respect to Mark Ingram and Dwayne Washington and Tony Jones Jr., Kamara is head and shoulders better than those guys in pretty much every facet of football.
Definitely. The Colts thing at wide receiver is interesting to me because clearly, GMs know more about roster construction, head coaches know more about roster construction than any of us. But I think that like literally anyone who looked at the Colts roster this offseason was like, okay, you need another wide receiver. Like you need someone else that you can depend on. And they just never signed anyone. I mean, they wound up obviously drafting Alec Pierce. He missed, as you mentioned, week 2 with a concussion. Looks like he'll be back. They've got Michael Pittman, who's a great wide receiver. Maybe not like a stone cold superstar or anything like that, but he's a very, very good player. But as soon as he goes down and then you lose Alec Pierce, who as a rookie should have been no guarantee this year anyway, then you've got Ashton Doolin, you've got Desmond Patton, you've got Paris Campbell, you've got Michael Strahan. Like it's like, why didn't they do more to address that position? Why not sign one of these veteran guys that are helping other teams?
It's a phenomenal question. I remember there was a report, you mentioned Alec Pierce, where it said from the first practice of the entire offseason, he was a starter. And I was like, is that saying more about Alec Pierce or saying more about the lack of talent on the Indianapolis Colts? And look, I'm no scout, I'm no talent evaluator. I didn't love what I saw at Cincinnati, or I should maybe better say, it seemed like his game would maybe take a little bit to translate. He's kind of a deep downfield burner, big body, and Desmond Ridder would kind of just lob it up, and he was more talented and more physically gifted than guys he went against, but kind of stiff in the hips, not a super developed kind of route runner, all those things. So I thought maybe it would take him a little bit to adjust. Even when he was healthy in week 1, he had a big drop in the end zone and then just had 0 catches on the day. So Yeah, I mean, look, they have a super expensive offensive line. Obviously, give Quentin Nelson $20 million a year. They now have Nyheim Hines making good money as their number 2 running back. And so they may have made the calculation of we've spent that offensive line at quarterback, at running back, even at tight end, bringing Mo Alley Cox back on a decent deal. It should not have led to the sacrifice of wide receiver depth. Even a guy like a Zach Pascal, who was on their team, who they let go to Philadelphia, follow head coach Nick Sirianni, he was making plays in that Vikings game. I mean, he's a good depth receiver. He blocks well. Yeah, it's just that they need to do so. Even with these top 2 guys back, they probably need to do something else.
Yeah, because Matt Ryan, we'll see how much he's got left in the tank this season once, Michael Pittman's back, once Alec Pierce gets up to speed. But currently, Matt Ryan through 2 games, 55.2 PFF grade, 56.6 passing grade. He's got 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions. Things have started out very ugly for the Colts. Clearly, things will get better once Pittman is back and once Shaq Leonard is back and, once everyone's healthy. But I don't know, it's just one of those situations. I mean, I will say, I think anyone who was looking at their roster probably thought they should have added Julio Jones, and Julio Jones made it 1 game before getting hurt. So maybe that wouldn't have been the right decision for them. But still, it's just pretty mind-blowing that they didn't wind up doing anything else about that. All right. We've got a Thursday night game tomorrow. It's the Browns and the Steelers. Jadeveon Clowney not going to play in that game. Myles Garrett, Joel Bitonio, and Jack Conklin all expected to play. Browns are favored by 4.5 points. Brad, how do you see this game going?
Yeah, so there was a pretty notable injury list for those Browns, but today was some great news. Clowney is out. I think we knew that already. But Myles Garrett coming back, I think he's going to dominate Dan Moore Jr., the left tackle for the Steelers, to the tune of maybe a couple sacks in that game, depending how healthy he truly is. But then also getting Joel Bitonio at left guard and Jack Conklin at right tackle against this formidable Pittsburgh Steelers defensive front that will be without T.J. Watt. I think the trenches will kind of dictate this game, and I think the Browns, though I don't know if they'll cover 4.5, which I guess is a cop-out answer. No, I'll go with it. I'll say they're going to win by a touchdown. They're going to win and cover. And I also just say, talking about Malik Willis and playing young quarterbacks, if you're going up against Jacoby Brissett and an injury-riddled Browns team, and you're still +5, +4.5, maybe you should just play Kenny Pickett instead of Mitchell Trubisky.
I'm going to take the points on this one. I think that the Steelers might not win it, but I think it's probably about a field goal game maybe that the Browns win. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just way more sour on Jacoby Brissett than anyone else is, but I just feel like that Steelers defense, even without TJ Watt in there, is going to feast on the Browns offense. I think that Minkah Fitzpatrick has been dominant this season. And yeah, the Patriots won in week 2. But that Steelers defense made Mac Jones look horrendous, which Mac Jones, throughout the first 18 games of his NFL career, didn't really look horrendous very often. And the Steelers did that to him. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty low-scoring game. I think that defense is going to dominate on both sides. And I don't know. I'm going to say big play for George Pickens. George Pickens, I think, told a reporter today that he was open on 90% of snaps against the Patriots, which is just so funny to say because I think he's got like 2 or 3 catches on the season so far. And the Patriots defense did a good job in that game. I guess I probably should have, but I'd like to go back and watch that game to see if Mitchell Trubisky really was missing George Pickens on 90% of routes. But yeah, I think that the Steelers wind up, you know what? I'll say it. I think the Steelers wind up beating the Browns. We'll go completely opposite sides on this one. Anything else on your mind before we get out of here for the next couple days? And I come back on Friday. You're going to be absent again on Friday for one more Friday. Then you've promised me that you will be here every other Friday of the week. But anything else on your mind before we get out here?
Yes, I'll never miss a Friday again. I'll have it, in writing or it's committed by blood now. Well, you mentioned the low score. I think tomorrow, there's supposed to be a lot of wind, up to 20-mile-an-hour gusts of wind. The over-under is at 38.5, which is crazy low if you're not into betting. Yet, under totals of 38.5 or less are on a 7-0 streak right now of going under. So Vegas sees a super low-scoring game, and traditionally, in the recent history, they've gone that low. So tomorrow might be a classic Thursday. We get some Brissett versus Trubisky. It might be an ugly football game. Like we all, that's what we love about Thursday football, right?
Oh yeah, that's the best thing about Thursday football. I feel like the matchups are better this year, but this week's schedule. Before we get out of here, I think that the NFL could have done a slightly better job of it because we've got Dolphins Bills at 1:00 on Sunday. Like that, I feel like really probably should have been more of a prime time, maybe a late afternoon game. Some of the late afternoon games, you've got Jaguars, Chargers, Rams, Cardinals, Falcons, Seahawks, Packers, Buccaneers. That's a good one. But I don't know. I probably would have preferred to see Dolphins, Bills. Maybe no one thought that the Dolphins were going to be as good as they are. But all right, we'll get out of here for now. Keep it on PFF.com. Subscribe to the PFF Wire podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a review as well. Throw out a 5-star review. Put something funny in there. We'll read it on air. You can roast us. You can do whatever you want as long as it's a 5-star review. And download the PFF app. Subscribe to PFF Plus. Still only $79.99 per year. You can get a week free trial, which is fantastic. Follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed. And like I said, I will be back with you guys again on Friday to go through a lot of the injuries that will be updated throughout the week.